Okay. That is all set up now. So
I can give an update while you're doing that, while you're setting things
yes,
up.
Please.
So since our last episode in which I said that we were possibly COVID-y, and I mentioned that we'd gotten tests, I've had multiple people reach out to me being like, it was funny because it was like a week later that they heard the podcast on audio. And they're like, oh my gosh, are you guys okay? Do you need anything? Like, people have been worried listening. And it was very appreciated. So first of all, thank you to all those who reached out and concerned. But there was no COVID. So no COVID last time. But we're always kind of, so when I see clients, like I'm always kind of waiting on test results. Like I try to get tested like once a week because I'm seeing people in person, and I certainly don't want to be a carrier to like the church, and I certainly don't want to be a carrier from the church to my people.
Sure.
So it's just kind of, I'm always making sure, because I think I do probably interface with more people than most humans are doing so right now. And there's definitely a risk to it. So
yeah,
I'm trying to make sure that I do the best that I can anyway, to be sure that I'm not, participating in the spread of a deadly disease. So that's just trying to do my part.
Yeah. Yeah. A deadly disease that is doing a really good job of spreading on its own.
Yeah, it is.
It does not need more help.
Need help. Yeah. It doesn't need any help. It's very good at what it does. And it doesn't care. It doesn't care about what you think about it. It just does what it does. So that's the funny thing about viruses.
Yeah. Natural laws, right? It's biology.
Yeah. They didn't vote for one party or the other.
But they will destroy anybody they can get their hands on.
From either party.
That's right. Viruses are amongst the most non-partisan of not quite beings, because
yes, the virus would, for instance, never come out as a politician openly. It would never do that.
No, because that's something that would shake us to the core.
Yes.
We're not ready for somebody to announce how political they are.
Yeah, it's certainly a disenfranchised group, the politician.
Yes.
Marginalized, pushed into hiding, for sure. So,
Dean Pelton. You rapscallion, you character, you.
Yeah. So, how's it been? It's been a fairly quiet couple of weeks, yeah?
Yeah. On a work level, right? We're sort of still chipping away. We actually took a couple of weeks off from B2B. We're going to be starting on Monday with some new episodes. The pop cultures, we're getting back into pop culture, wandering the desert, small groups, all the sort of usual stuff. So we're kind of ratcheting back into full gear as we get ready for kind of the home stretch before summer break and figuring stuff out. That's really it.
And I think we're at as a country, we're at 3 weeks since our last insurrection. So, I think we can go ahead and write 21 days since last insurrection up on that board, and that's good news. That's good news.
I want to know who's the person who holds the chalk, who does that at the end of every business day, like 21.
Yeah. And what does he look like when it goes back to 0?
I knew it. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've both been doing, right? I think because of the sort of, we talked a little bit about like the rise of fascism and kind of this like capital insurrection. We've been listening to a really cool series on like the history of actual fascist insurrections in the past, which has been interesting and eye-opening. And the one thing that I'll say, right? I mean, even kind of like looking at this from a very divorced point of view, it's interesting that in past democracies that have fallen to some of this like internal pressure, people didn't really take it seriously at the beginning. Is kind of a common thread when it comes, like people didn't take Mussolini very seriously at the beginning. And it's not a question of like drawing an apples to apples comparison, but I think at the very least, like it's helpful to learn, to be aware of history, to like at least take things seriously so that we're not caught off guard by things being bigger than we, think in retrospect. It would really stink like 2 years from now to be like, oh man, that came out of nowhere. Did it though?
Yeah, pretty sure that not out of nowhere. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting series. Admittedly, you're probably further along in it than I am, just because of time constraints and all of that kind of stuff. Children who want attention and et cetera, et cetera. They're really selfish kids. You know, it's like, I'm just like, daddy's just trying to listen to his podcast and ignore you. And you're clamoring for my attention, asking me to like play a game and give you a hug. And it's just like, don't they have any respect for like my priorities? You know?
Yeah. Kids, what you need to do is figure out how to be less needy. That's what I
Yeah.
need from
Give
you right
yourselves
now.
hugs. Just go hug yourselves. Go practice on your teddy bears. You know, like and just pretend,
Or
call that bear
just
dad.
one of these. Just one of these.
Yeah. I hug my children. I do hug I like hugging my children. And yeah, it's one of the things I think that was interesting was just like seeing, especially like in that Mussolini episode, like how quickly the ideology spreads, you know, and really how what's the word I'm looking for? Out like kind of like not like out of conscious awareness, you know,
Yeah.
like it's like it's a very infiltrating is a good word I think for it, but
Yeah.
I don't know what the right word is. But it's like it's very infiltrating, and it comes at a place I think where it's like you don't really realize that it's happening in your space. You know,
Yeah.
it's not like it's happening out there. It's like actually happening. And I do think there's some level even of that happening here now and in the church. I think we've talked about that, like that, like these kind of super like fascist ideals are kind of coming into even to our church, you know. I think that there's some overlap that makes it pretty easy for that to kind of like that stuff to kind of cross pollinate. You know, like our love of tradition, our love of old things, and we're like, yeah, you know, this is how it's been done, and also like back to women not speaking, right? And like back to, you know, and we start getting into kind of like these old wait a minute, now I think we're starting to get into some kind of maybe dangerous territory that at first glance, you know, it seems like orthodoxy would be supportive of in some capacity due to its tradition, but then you start realizing like, oh, you're kind of co-opting a tradition to some more nefarious ends.
Yeah.
You know,
It's not really tradition, right?
Yeah.
It's one of the online phenomenons, right? Is you have kind of the people who I think who sometimes pose in a very traditional way online, who spend all of their time just anathemizing bishops and other people.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're cloaking yourself with kind of tradition and or kind of Orthodox Christian ecclesiology, but at your core, you're actually approaching the world with a very postmodern sort of non-denominational, like I'm the only authority that I count, so I get to throw around anathemas like candy.
Let me tell you what orthodoxy really is about.
Yes, even though, right, like I saw this thing that was going around recently. I think I sent you a screenshot of somebody who was saying like, you know, we should like catechumens should be sort of demanding that priests receive them by baptism rather than chrismation, and it's like that is the most consumeristic, actually not traditional thing that I've ever heard in my entire life. Like, hi, Father, I appreciate you teaching me about what the church is, but I need to stop you right there and tell you that that's not what the church is and demand that you do the sacrament the way I want to, even though like I've only known about this for 6 months. It is ridiculous.
Let me tell you how this is going to happen.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
And I want a kiddie pool full of Jello. Just that, like, if that's what I want to be baptized in. And if you can't make that happen, then I'm going to take my tithe money elsewhere.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I read a post on Tumblr that said that that's actually the way things used to be.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. It's so it's transparently ridiculous. But again, it's like the veneer of, you know, if I say the word the fathers often enough, clearly I know what I'm talking about. Like, no, it's just
right.
It's disappointing.
Yeah. But that's how it happens. That's how it happens.
Well, on a related note, actually, in terms of the way weird things spread, I've been doing a little experiment, and I've been trying to be more conscious over the last month or so of fact checking things when friends on social media, especially on Facebook, share things that are wrong and just like factually untrue, right? Not a question of opinion, just factually untrue. Yeah. Like that photo was cropped in a misleading sort of way, or that statistic is totally wrong. I've done it a lot of times, maybe 2 or 3 times a week over the last month.
Yeah.
Only one person has actually been like, oh, I apologize for that. I looked into this, and you're right. I'm going to take this post down.
Yeah.
Everybody else either ignores it or makes a
doubles down.
joke about it and leaves the misleading thing. Like, this is how misleading things spread so easily.
Yeah.
You know, it's crazy to me.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, like how much it happens. You know, I've seen talk about, like, you know, like just the kind of the secular scientism and aggressive secularism, kind of like this stuff. And I think those terms can get co-opted in a way that make it really dangerous. You know, that make it sound like, again, kind of like the church is like openly under attack during this pandemic, as if, like, you know, governments are being, I think, more restrictive or more limiting to religious communities, when, and I'm sure that maybe that's the case in some spaces, but I don't know that I've seen that being the overwhelming case. You know, like,
Yeah.
I know plenty of churches who applied for PPP loans and they got them. You know, they
Sure.
like, despite like the state and church separation, like, you know, we're like, government money, please. Like, we'll take that, you know?
Yeah.
But then when it comes to like the mandates on masks, we're a little bit more like, don't step on my toes, you know, but like, pay my salary, but don't step on my toes about the mask thing, and don't, you know, limit my numbers like that you can't do. Even though, as far as I know, like, religious communities are still open, at least in some capacity, right? Whether it's to like 50, 25, 10%, depending on different, you know, I know New York has done it one way, and Arizona's done it another way. But I'll tell you what's not happening. It's like sporting events, like those things aren't happening here. So like I don't know that it's fair to say that religion is somehow being targeted through this. Like, you know, I mean, people aren't going to football games. People aren't going to basketball games. They're not going to baseball games. So
for the most part,
I think I think the idea is just like, you know, we're all just trying to do the best we can with this thing. And like, we like, commitment to exercising religion is like pretty foundational to American life. And like, I don't know that I see it being violated. I see it being, you know, the government being like, it's actually our duty to protect our citizens. So like, we need to do that. But it's not like, down with the religious communities, and like, look how aggressive my secularism is, and all of that kind of stuff. At least that's, again, maybe that's just, and that's my perception, but
I
really
totally agree.
Interesting.
And I mean, actually, I don't think we put this on the outline, but even in terms of the way that like pop culture sort of, you know, deals with the church, I think what we're going to be talking about today, like community, actually, like the interesting way that it sort of comments on Christianity in a very kind of like sympathetic and nuanced sort of way. Like, I don't know, I feel like the world here in the United States, the world is not out to get us, as, you know, like in certain parts of the world, right, where people are actually being arrested for faith and being executed for faith. That's one thing, but here in the States, like, I think we make mountains out of molehills sometimes.
Yep.
You know, because the mask mandate applies to 7-Eleven too. It's not like this is some sort of anti-religious thing or whatever.
Right.
But anyway.
Yep.
That's what's happening in the world.
Yay. But other than that, again, 21 days, no insurrection. Feeling pretty good about that. Yeah. 22.
It's that scene in The Office, right? Like, how we've gone this number of days without a workplace incident after Michael trashes just this frustrated, like,
That's the visual that comes to mind. But
yeah.
Anyway, should we get to it?
Yeah. I think it's time that Steve and Christian do a podcast. See, we're via Zoom. It's not quite as in sync as it should be.
No. I was trying to read your nonverbals there. We can even try to do like this number. I don't know if it, like, how does that?
Danny Pudi and Donald Glover did that in their like live table read of the of one of the scripts, actually, which is very delightful. Just pop.
I love it. It's so good. I love when they sell the handshake at one point and they're like, they can't quite do it because it like lost its heart or whatever.
Troy goes over to Jeff. It's like, Jeff, Pierce paid money for our handshake, and now we can't get the magic back. It's so whiny and immature. It's so good.
So here we are. We're talking about community. The show that has delivered us with 6 seasons and hopefully a movie one day.
Fingers crossed.
Yep, 6 seasons in a movie. Yeah. Well, do you want to give us a little summary, Stephen?
Yes. So I think like the show has been not live for a long enough period of time that I don't think we need to sort of announce spoilers, right? It's been out there for a while. Like,
yeah, I mean,
right? Do you think
it went off the air in 2015, so 6 years,
right? Right. I mean, now we're getting into the weeds of like how long does the statute of spoilers actually run?
Because it started more than 10 years ago at this point.
Yes.
Started in 2009, I think, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think we're gonna like spoiler porg, but again, it's been out there long enough that come on, guys. So anyway,
spoiler porgs implied.
Yes. Footnote, right?
Yes. Imagine your own spoiler porg here if you so choose.
Yes. Let's close our eyes and think about what a spoiler porg would sound like in season 7.
Yes, exactly.
Dun 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 dun. Anyway, summary of what the show is all about. So Community. How do we even describe this show, right? Which takes so many twists and turns during its 6 seasons. But it starts anyway. It starts in season 1 with this guy, Jeff Winger, who is an attorney who it turns out faked his bachelor degree. He got his bachelor's degree from Columbia, and now he has to get one from the United States, which is a great line. So he needs to get his bachelor's. He wants to do it because he's kind of like lazy and not a hard worker. He's really talented, but doesn't want to put in the effort. So he goes to Greendale Community College, where one of his buddies is a professor, so he can get all the answers. It turns out that his buddy is not going to give him all the answers. He fakes being a Spanish tutor so that he can originally hit on this girl, Britta, who then talks to Abed, who then invites all of these people, and a Spanish study group sort of happens, right? And this study group over time really becomes Jeff's family. They stop being a Spanish study group as they take other courses, right? They graduate from Greendale. I mean, the sort of background of the show really changes over time. Characters come and go, but it's really about the relationship of these friends that start as a Spanish study group. And I think the real through line through the series is the development and growth and repentance of Jeff Winger. Like on some level, it's kind of the story of Jeff Winger. But that's it. It's this unlikely group of people who come together at the very beginning to study. They get into these weird adventures, right? Community is really well known for its genre sort of episodes. It does homages to Westerns, and it does homages to zombie films. Like it's very kind of a high concept show that has
some people mistake as parody.
Yeah, correct. Thanks, Abed. But yeah, to the extent that one can summarize Community, I kind of feel like that's a summary, right?
Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, it definitely is like an ensemble show, right? Like, so like to say that Jeff Winger is like the main character is definitely not the case.
Yes.
But it certainly centers around his evolution as a person, I think, for sure. And kind of around that, you begin to see this formation of that community. Like you said, like they started as a study group, and he even says that at one point, congratulations, you started as a Spanish study group and now you've become a community. Yeah. Which is a really beautiful line, right? Like we started this one thing and now we've kind of been changed into this other thing. But yeah, I mean, it really is just super hard to nail down like anything else beyond that for this show, because it's always like pushing against things, which is just fun. It's a really fun show.
So did you like it?
I do. I really, really like it a lot. It's funny because it's warm, right? It's so creative. And like, I don't know, they're really messed up people, right? Like they clearly are these like flawed human beings. But as we've talked about, like in The Office, right? Like I don't really care for The Office. I mean, I do think it's funny, but it's a very uncomfortable show for me because I do feel like there's a lot of like mean spiritedness in that show.
Yeah.
And I don't think that like that's the case with this one, right? Like I don't think that it's mean spiritedness. I think it's people just kind of operating out of their wounds and operating out of their flaws, and in so doing kind of hurting each other, right?
Yeah.
Which to me feels like a different thing and kind of more accurate to actually what our life is. Like when we operate out of these wounds, then we give them control, and when we don't address them, they just get more and more powerful and they fester. But yeah, I think that it's funny because this was actually my first time through the whole series, and I could have sworn that I'd watched the whole thing before. but I never did. I know for sure that I watched like the first 2 seasons when it was just like on the air.
Yeah.
And I think I must have just watched like select like episodes throughout the rest of its run. But I definitely did not know a lot of the things that I started seeing, especially in like 4, 5, and 6. I was like, what? Like, what's going on here? Like, I don't remember any. Troy leaves. What's going on? But yeah, I mean, I was really, really happy to get a go and watch it. It's worth the investment for sure. What do you think about it, Steve? I kind of feel like I already know what you're gonna have to say about this.
Oh, I love this show. Of
course you do.
Yeah, it's so good. It's you mentioned this thing about being on the air, by the way. I just want to pause for a moment and note that there was a time in world history when The Office, Parks and Rec, 30 Rock, and Community were like
Thursday
the
nights.
lineup for Thursday
NBC
nights.
Thursdays. Yep.
Right?
Those are my favorite days.
I mean, how far the world has fallen since then.
And right before that, it was My Name is Earl. Do you remember that show? Did you ever watch that show?
I never got into that show.
Dude, it's so good.
Really?
Yeah. It's so dumb and so funny. It's good.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna add that to the list.
Yeah.
But yeah, 30 Rock, I think or not 30 Rock. I love 30 Rock too. But this, I think, has a depth.
We've never done a 30 Rock.
We've never done a 30 Rock show. Yeah. We might have to add that to the list. Just hit all of these like classics, because we've done Parks and Rec, we've done The Office. Yeah. But
watch
Community,
Lost.
I should at some point. I know. You've been wanting to since we started Pop Culture Coffee Hour. You've been itching for that Lost episode. Stop giving me that look. That is not going to be available on the audio version of the podcast.
But they feel it, Steve. They feel it.
I'm uncomfortable in my ears now. What's happening? But yeah, Community, I love. It just has this depth. I mean, I think like it's I don't know. It takes risks the way that other shows didn't. It just kind of like has this grand vision, right? Like every show, essentially, every episode for a while there is like this standalone movie almost, right? It has this very high sense of what it's capable of doing, but it remains very grounded. Like it's not something that is, it's not about the spectacle, right? Even when you get into the sort of the paintball episodes or anything, like it's still so character driven. It's still so like, it has this heart. You know, you have this sense of like the love that these people really have for each other, which you feel like you buy them, I think, as characters, which is why, like one of my favorite examples of this, right? Which I think Dan Harmon, the creator, actually talks about, right? Like how the funniness comes from who these characters are. There's the Dungeons and Dragons episode. Did you watch it? Because it's not on Netflix anymore.
You know, I saw the second one, though they took that first one off because I guess of like the use of blackface, which when they started referencing it in the second episode, I was like, huh? Like I don't remember a Dungeons and Dragons episode, but
it's on Amazon Prime, so you can actually go back and watch it on Amazon Prime because the first couple of seasons are there. But so what happens there is like Pierce is excluded from this game, and he's causing a stink about this. Jeff takes him outside. He's like, "This is happening because you guys are excluding me. Do you like being excluded from things, Jeff?" And Jeff responds, "Yes." And Pierce kind of pauses, and like, oh, like it's funny. It's like this kind of comedic moment, but characters and their motivations and what they want, and it hits because it's not like wacky situations that drive the humor. Mm-hmm. It's just like who these people are and their woundedness, which kind of percolates out, right? Because even Pierce, who is I think the closest that you get to a bad guy on the show, is just deeply lonely and deeply flawed, and you feel bad for him. So
lonely. I know, so isolated, has such a bad relationship with his dad, and like you get it. You don't like approve of it, but you're like, I get it, and you kind of get why the group keeps him around. Like he's a jerk, he's a misogynist, and he's a racist, but he's like our jerk, and he's like our misogynist, and he's like our racist. And
he does come through.
He does.
Like there's the paintball one, the second one, I think with City College, right? Like he's the guy who wins paintball
with Sawyer from Lost.
I don't know the reference.
There's a great cross reference between Lost and in this, and it's, I can't say it because it involves a bad word, but Sawyer, the guy who plays like hey there, whatever, like the gunslinger, whatever. I can't remember any of the lines that he has, but he
Oh, the Black Rider.
The Black Rider. Yeah, he plays Sawyer in Lost. And there's Sawyer's catchphrase is a bad word, and when he gets shot, he says it, and you're like, yes. Yeah, it's a very good moment. As a Lost fan, you're like, he said it.
It all fits.
Yeah.
That's
this is what he was doing before he ended up on the island. maybe Greendale's on the island.
All I know is he's just an average looking guy with a big chin.
Yeah.
This is Jeff Winger. Surely you heard Jeff. Of me. Yeah.
Oh,
no, man. I haven't heard of you, Jeff. He's lying.
Yeah. By the way, what Enneagram type do you think Jeff is?
That's a good question. I don't know. I'm gonna defer to you on this. Like,
I think he's definitely one of two, but I'm not sure which one, because he seems equal parts of them. He's either a 3 or an 8 for sure. Like he's got the kind of like the ambition and like the like how do I win kind of thing as a 3, right? And he's willing to deceive and all of this kind of stuff. Like he's like that low end of 3. Yeah. Right. But he's got like, I think the 8 stuff, which is just like this utter fear of vulnerability.
Yeah.
Like not at all wanting to show any sign of weakness, not like none of that. But when he can do that, when he can actually let his guard down, he like goes to being this like loving, caring person, which is where an 8 would go. When they can let that down, they would move towards kind of that like 2 persona. Yeah. And I also was thinking too, I was thinking about all the Enneagram types of all the characters. My guess is that Annie is a 1 with a 2 wing, and that Shirley is a 2 with a 1 wing, which is why they like do this. Yeah. Because like Annie just wants to be perfect, but she also really wants to like fix people. Like, let me help you. Right. Like, I know how to help you. And Shirley is much more like the manipulative, whatever, but she also like really likes to be right and stuff. That's why like, but she's also got that strong three wing too. So it was a really fun show to try to like type everybody.
Yeah, because they're real characters. Like I think they make sense as people, right? You can think about them because you know who Shirley is. Them. Yeah. Same with Britta, who's like, you're just like, oh, you're this like total counterphobic 6 who like wants to bring down authority and like doesn't trust anything or anyone, but at the same time like is deeply just like loyal and committed and and such an insecure poser, right? Who just like wants to seem like she's doing the right thing. Like, oh, my friends from college, like they got arrested during a protest. I haven't been arrested in a long time.
Yeah.
It's so crippling. but that's the thing. Like they're all flawed, right? But like you love them all, and you get why they love each other, which makes this, I think, so wonderful.
Indeed.
So yeah, and I'm glad we're talking about this because I think there's so much there. There's so much there.
Yeah. There's a lot to be said about this show. But I think one of the most interesting things that we maybe want to dive into kind of as like a thing unto itself is just the way that the stories are told, right? Like that when I look at Community, like that is the number one kind of jump out thing, right? And like the fluidity with which they have to jump in and out of genres or to do things in a way that I don't think I've ever seen any other show do. It was so fun. And there's kind of, I feel like 2 threads that kind of happen side by side, right? And one is like kind of the meta narrative that gets told about like telling stories, right? Like storytelling from like the meta perspective on it. But then there's also kind of like what you were saying is the part of it, like that's the community itself is what tells the story, right? That's what the story is about, and really what drives the story. It's not so much about kind of like, this week on whatever, which like you never get like a, and the same is true with like The Simpsons, right? Like The Simpsons is very much a character driven show. Like they're put into these wacky circumstances, and then you just see like how Homer and Bart and Marge and whatever respond. Same too with Community. Like, let's take these, 7 people and throw them into like a paintball match and see what happens. And like, you get Abed, who's kind of like, for sure, like there's that G.I. Joe episode where they refer to him as fourth wall. He's always breaking the fourth wall in a way that you go like, he just goes, this is a TV show. right?
Yeah.
Like, and all the characters are like, no, it's not, whatever, shut up, Abed. But he's like, no, it's a TV show, which is, it opens so much possibility in it. But overall, right, I think that the thing that really makes Community work is the idea that community itself is the concept.
Yeah.
Right? You take these people, you throw them into a bunch of wacky circumstances, and then you just watch what happens. Right? It really is. It's like the, whatever the dice rolling episode is, where like, okay, like you just see you get a perspective on what would happen if a different character did a different thing. Like, it's not about just going to get the pizza, right? Yeah. It's about who's left behind when someone goes to get the pizza.
Yeah.
So when you have these 6 people together, this happens. When you have these 6 people together, this happens. When you have these, which is great. If it was plot driven, then it would have just been someone going to get the pizza. It would have just been a plot point.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's about Jeff going to get the pizza, or about Britta going to get the pizza, or about Abed going to get the pizza,
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah, no, I love that. And even to sort of springboard off of Abed, right? Because Abed, I think, is kind of like the wackiest of the characters, right? From the very beginning, he's the one that meta, looking at everything through the lens of pop culture. But the reason he does that, and Abed actually discloses this himself at some point, like that's the only way he knows how to relate to people. Right? Like at one point he even says, like, the only way that I distinguish you guys is by hair color or whatever it is, right?
Well, and there's at one point where Jeff, when in the last season, when Frankie shows up and he asks Abed, like, don't you still have to smell their hair, like to tell Annie and Frankie apart?
Yeah. Like, he's bad with faces. He's bad with like reading emotions.
He doesn't get it.
Right. So he understands the world like through these like this lens. Like, so even that, like the wackiness of it actually has like, it's telling a story about who Abed is and his attempts to reach out to people. And the difficulties that he has reaching out to people, right? Like Abed, who is this guy, like Troy is his first real friend, right? Mm-hmm. This community that he belongs to is actually his first probably group of friends because he's this misfit sort of growing up, right? Yeah.
And their friendship, by the way, is just like so sweet, because they I'm gonna get emotional. Dang it. Yeah. How is this show making me emotional? How are Troy and Abed making me emotional?
Because they love each other.
Because they do, for who they really are, right? Like they just accept, like, oh, you're my friend who's a little bit wacky, and like I need to live my life kind of in accordance with that. And we go into our Imaginarium and like we go do the thing, and it's like, yeah, it's fine, like this is just what we do, and it's so loving, loving.
And acceptance is really the thing, right, at the core of this community. Yeah. So this is kind of like big picture, right? This is what Greendale is supposed to be. Greendale is a place that accepts people who are at the end of their rope. They're the losers, right? You think about how the show starts at the very beginning when Dean Pelton is giving that speech. It's a place for washed up athletes from high school and divorcees who don't know what to do with themselves and, whatever, failed careers and so forth. And that's who all these people are. And like all of those flaws are kind of accepted in this, right? Even that relationship between Troy and Abed, because Troy in high school, right? Like the character that he is in season 1, he's this guy who's trying to pose to be sort of a macho jock and everything, but he can't handle the pressure, right? He fakes his injury to get out of that life. And it turns out, as he gets to know Abed more and more, like there's this weird, quirky, comic booky, disconnected from reality sort of guy in there as well. He's actually not the cool jock. He's actually just this guy who has a really delightful imagination who thinks, what if a ghost took Annie's pen, right? And kind of comes up with this story. And this is the first time, like he leaves the football team. He leaves the kind of the pressure of the persona. And Abed is the first one who actually begins to accept him. And this group actually accepts him. And it's no longer
see his person, right? Like
Troy, the Wonder Boy
face instead of his mask. Yeah, like that's actually a really interesting perspective on that there's a level of like these people finally being freed, right? Like they're freed from the things that they needed to be in the past, right? Yeah. Shirley's realized that her life has kind of fallen apart in a lot of ways. She's driven away her husband due to like her manipulation and all of this kind of stuff, like because there's a lot of that. Like she's very manipulative, Shirley. Yeah. That Jeff his what
the guilt trips, right? There's the documentary episode when Pierce is in the hospital and Shirley's the only one who doesn't get the talking head. and Abed comes in, right? She's like, oh, I mean, I was just doing a talking head unless you want me to not be the to be the only person who doesn't get a talking head. Like she's the guilt trips.
Yes.
Constant.
And people like that, right? Who are like so passive aggressive about that stuff that it's like, get it off of me, but I do, like now that you're mentioning in some ways, right? Like this idea of acceptance and kind of like what Dean Pelton's speech is in the beginning of like, this is the place for these people and these people and these people and these people and these people. Like, isn't there like a part of your spirit that wants to be a part of something like that? Like that you just feel yourself going like, oh, what a relief that would be. What a relief it would be if we could just like free ourselves, be in a place where we could free ourselves from these personas and false selves and roles and whatever that we've played for all of our lives. Yeah. And instead just get to be like persons with one another, to see each other face to face, instead of kind of like, behind these masks. I'm not talking about like these masks. I'm talking about like these masks, right? Like, look at how great and successful I am. Masks in the theatrical sense, not in the healthcare prevention sense. Anyway, but like I wonder, right? Like, is that even the implicit messaging that we give, like as a church? This is the place for the dropouts, for the divorcees who don't know what to do with their lives, for the misogynist, racist, whatevers who like there are misogynist, racist, whatevers. Or do we just kind of set up as like this prim and proper place where only certain kinds of folks who fit our mold are welcome? Does that make any sense? I don't know. I wonder about that.
You must be this holy to enter, right? Or you must appear this holy to enter. I'll give you kind of a personal example of this that I experienced over the holidays. I did not buy any Christmas presents this year for anybody.
I know. I've been meaning to talk to you about that.
This is a counterpoint to what I was actually getting at. So I didn't buy any presents for anybody. And I just felt like so overwhelmed and just kind of like, December was a busy month and whatever. And so I remember like texting some family saying like, hey, I didn't buy presents for nieces and nephews, didn't do any of this. And all of them, right, were just like, that doesn't matter. Like the next time you see the kids, if you want to bring them a present, that's fine. They just want to see you when they're able to after the pandemic is done. Like, it's okay. They still love you because you're their uncle or you're their, godfather or whatever it is. And like that moment of I didn't do this thing, right? That is kind of this like the pressure around the holidays of buying the presents and so forth, but that's okay. Was like exactly that moment, I think for
because it was like your personhood that mattered, right? Like that was what matters. Like whatever, like we don't want you to do the thing or the whatever. Yeah, it's you being here that is actually going to be a game changer for us and for these kids. Yeah,
and that's amazing. And I think like from the church point of view, right? Thinking about this as somebody who grew up in the church. And like the way, the cultural accretions around it sometimes, right? Because there is, I think, that moral pressure to behave a certain way, or at least to appear as if you behave a certain way, right?
Yeah.
Like I know kids growing up who got into drugs at a very young age, or got into sort of like gangs and violence at a very young age, or, got pregnant even at a very young age, right? All that sort of stuff, right? Which is the things that good kids are not supposed to do. And that really put them at odds with the wider community because of like the shame around it, right? Like that's not what kids do here, right? Good Christian kids don't do that.
And this is interesting, right? Because now this kind of gets us back, I think, to the character plot driven thing, right? That like I think we decide like, we're a plot driven people. Like kids go to church and they do this thing and they do the and it doesn't matter who they are, right? We put them through these programs. I say this line, you say that line. It doesn't really matter as long as you just kind of like follow the acting points, right?
Yeah.
Instead of being able to kind of say like, well, what about like Jimmy, and what about Erica, and what about Demetra, and like what about like whoever, right? Like we need to like actually come face to face with the people that are in our communities, right? And then we are able to respond to people. Like I think we kind of think what's the kind of like pre-written curriculum that we can come up with like for Goya or Soyo or whatever. And then we'll write this script or this plot and like send it to them. And then we expect them to like do the thing. instead of being like, wait a minute, we are way more character driven as a people than we are plot driven.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Like I could hear your words before you even started saying them. Like, oh
Yeah.
yes, like this is so amazing, right? And because I think that plot driven way of things is really stifling.
Yes.
You know, because you think about the repentance that actually happens in community, right? Jeff being the clearest example, because we see him through 6 seasons, right? He has the freedom to repent because there is no sort of plot, right?
Mm-hmm.
That he has to sort of like fit into. He just kind of like he's if I can use this language, he's kind of like won over or worn down by the love of the people around him, right? And he begins to want different things, and he begins to sort of like be motivated by different things.
Yeah.
He no longer is in
still
this
struggling though, right? Like it's always this like tension for him between like wanting to be selfless, but then like being just compulsively self-reliant, right? Like there's that moment where by the way, Garrett's wedding episode was one of my favorite episodes of all time.
So good. Yes.
It is. I think it's one of the funniest episodes in the entire series. But the thing that happens there, right, is as he's getting prepared to like give this speech because Garrett's brother can't, you know, he's like, everyone's split up. And we found out all this stuff about the community and like all the people that are here, and like we're gonna just wow them, and they're gonna look at us, and they're gonna like we're gonna beat the pants off of the competition. And he's like, oh, what I'm trying to say is, I love myself, you know. And like just that writing with like where he goes from being like we've tried to like step away from ourselves to his utter self-obsession is like, it's so good because it like that's how it happens for all of us, you know, like we go from this part of us that really does want to be like altruistic and giving and caring, and is so committed to other people and so committed to our friends and all of this kind of stuff. And in the very next moment, we're operating out of this total just like self-obsession and thinking that we're so fantastic. And like, look at this great thing that I've done, you know, when it's really the information that was given to him by his community, like the people around him, right? Like he hasn't done any of this research. He's just been drinking scotch the whole time. Yeah.
Which is what repentance is, right? I mean, like there are certain sins that I think all of us have more of a proclivity to, right? Like Jeff had that sort of self-reliance and that pride. That's kind of like the cross that he bears. And yes, he progresses during the course of 6 seasons, and he's a different man in season 6 at that wedding than he would have been at the very beginning, right? When he started at Greendale. Totally. And yet that wound, even if it's partially healed over, it gets opened up sometimes, right? It's like it flares up at different sort of times because we're never healed. Right. It's never kind of like the static moment where you make it, where Jeff has made it or whatever it is. You make progress, but sometimes whatever, like those soul wounds are still there. And it's great to see that, right? That like, because that's one of the dynamic things about being a human and the exhausting things about being a human, right? Like you're never done with that work. You're never done with that work.
Yep. Yeah, no. And it would be, and I think that's why we keep wanting, like, and even why in the imagination of the characters, when they get to season 6, they can't stop dreaming about season 7, right? Yeah. Like they want that season 7. They want to see where it's going to go, like how they're going to continue to impact one another. And even Jeff has that. What is it? I forget exactly how he says it, but like he comes into the teacher's lounge when he's imagining the scenario in which they're all teachers and they've all continued to evolve and like grow as people. Right. And like, even we're back to Dean Pelton being a student and how to be a dean. Right.
Yeah.
There's this level of growth. And he says like, oh man, how does he say? He's like, we're here to like shape minds of like these young people or whatever, but we can't stop just like shaping one another or something like that. Like, even though we're here to do this one thing, the plot, right? Like, even though we're here this is the plot of what Greendale is for, to shape young minds and hearts or whatever. We can't help but shape one another's minds and hearts just by being the people that we are. Yeah. You know, and that to me is like, that's the difference between that plot driven show and that character driven show. And I wonder too, like, you know, if we, not just in like ministry and how we treat young people, but even just like how we kind of conceptualize like Orthodox tradition and kind of like living into it. Like, do we tend to be more plot driven or character driven in how we approach these things, right? Yeah. Like the plot driven Christian, we should write a book called The Plot Driven Christian.
Yes. Yes.
which is different than the purpose-driven life.
Patent pending for everybody listening now. Patent pending.
Dibs.
Yeah,
I'll write it and I'll lick it, and then when I lick it, like that's how you know that it's just mine.
It's got COVID all over it.
Do you remember that commercial, by the way? Yeah, it does. Nope, tested negative. I'm not gonna lie, I got my results while we were here, so I had to check them just to make sure that I didn't have COVID.
Nice, thank God.
But yeah, I tested negative. So let there be celebration. There was much rejoicing.
Huzzah!
I wasn't worried about it, but it's what happened. But I wonder, like, do we tend to have much more plot-driven kind of understandings of holiness, or is there some level of like character-driven understanding for holiness? Right? There isn't like just one way to do this orthodox thing. We think that there is, and that's what gets really rigid, and I think that's where we start to get really dangerous. But if we are going to be honest, right, like if we look at the lives of the saints and see the characters that are behind it, there isn't just one way to do this thing. Yes. Like you look at Saint Mary of Egypt, who went to church once, one time that we know of, took communion twice. She's walking on the water. That is not a plot-driven life. Yeah. Right. That is the one way that there is for orthodoxy is the person Jesus Christ. Yes. He is the way. He's the way. Yes. And that's it. And whatever we do to like find ourselves in him, to be in him, to commune with him, that's it. Saint Maria Skopsova, whose biography I just read, who's amazing. Like she, she's this nun, and she like never went to church because there was just like other stuff she needed to do. But if and actually like the Metropolitan sent this priest who like was gonna like teach her the way, and she was like, yeah, I'm not gonna do that. Like I need to go get food, I need to make meals, I need to do all this other stuff, and then she dies this martyr's death. Yeah. Because like,
that's what God was calling her to do.
Yes.
Right. Because that's what God.
We can be flexible about this, right? Like there's a flexibility to these things.
Well, and I think the flexibility is like, what do each of us need for salvation? Right? What is the thing that God is calling us to do? Because some people in church history are the great fasters, and some are the great ascetics, and some are the sort of, great noetic sort of prayers, right? And some are the great givers, like Saint Maria. That was her particular call. That's what she needed. She needed to be the one going to the market and hustling to make sure that she got the food to feed people. Yeah. Others, their salvation was worked out, with during all night vigils in church, right? It depends on the person. And
see, this is interesting. Sorry, if I can interrupt you? Yes. And I wonder, like, if in some ways, right, there's like, we talk about the Enneagram a lot, but as I was reading through Saint Maria's life, I was like, holy cow, like this woman is an 8, like absolutely for sure, 100%, without a doubt, an 8. But her path was to move into like the 2 energy, which is to care for other people, to be devoted singularly to this cause. And like, that was her move of redemption. Yeah. And that became like her focus, and she pursued it with this vigorous energy that only an 8 could have, like otherwise we'd all get a little bit sleepy, I think, doing kind of like the stuff that she was doing. But I wonder like if almost that's how it goes. And my guess, right, is that Saint Mary of Egypt was probably a 7. Like she's wanting more, like give me more, all of it, like willing to do whatever she want. And like the move for growth for a 7 is toward 5. And 5s are the most withdrawn type on the Enneagram. And so like, what's her path towards salvation? Complete individuality, complete removal from the thing that is like, her appetitive kind of like way of being in the world. She goes and she becomes like the great ascetic of the church. Yeah. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like it's interesting. I don't know. I'm spitballing this idea right now. I have never thought about this before.
Yeah. But it's like, it's this transcendence of yourself, right? It's this actual kind of like leaving yourself, right? It's ecstasy, right? I mean, like even fathers will talk about this, right? That the sort of the moves of salvation is kind of like coming out of yourself. Maximus the Confessor, he talks about the poetry of creation, like non-being comes out of itself and becomes being, right? When creation happens, right? We're called out of ourselves in our relationships. Like, I think that's a really beautiful model. Like we're called out of our 8-ness, right? To become this stretch. We're called out of our 7-ness to become this stretch. I think that's beautiful. And that is like, that's medicine though. That's like a particular calling for particular people based upon their situations. And I love that as like it's like a person driven model for growth rather than this plot driven. And I see, honestly, I'll see it online too. We talked even at the start of the show about the way some of the toxic sort of orthodox stuff happens online. And this is giving me language to think about this.
We should call it orthodoxy.
Oh, orthodoxy. Oh, it does not roll off the tongue. Don't like it.
It is not rolling off of the tongue.
No, it just plops out of the mouth. It's gross.
But
I think what that orthotoxicity, whatever you want to call it, right? It's very much that plot-driven thing. Like you see people who are out there anathematizing this and that and just like picking fights for no reason. It's like they're trying to be Saint Mark of Ephesus. They have this model of like, here's this guy who busted heretics and he said no to Rome at the councils and all that sort of stuff. And they're trying to like follow the plot points of his life without understanding like the need that took a Mark of Ephesus to like be the one in that situation. Right. Yes. Like it's kind of like because you can't map on the plot points of St. Mary's life. Like I couldn't map those plot points onto my life. I couldn't map them onto your life. And that's the point. Any sense. Right. You couldn't map on St. Mary of Egypt's plot points to St. Maria of Paris. And that's not the point. Like, that's not the point. Right. I like this model. It makes a lot of sense.
And I wonder too, right. If this is why even when Jesus tells people to follow him, he's telling individuals, right. He's telling like people that he's actually interacting with, you follow me, right. You.
Yeah.
He's engaging with people on this kind of like respect for like the individual personhood of each, right? Like even think about the calling of Matthew when he calls him by name, like Matthew, follow me.
Yeah.
Right. Like he's not just talking to like all of the whatevers. He's like, you there, you know?
Well, this makes sense too, because like, I think we've talked about this before that, when Jesus heals people, he often tells them to sort of be quiet, right? They want to follow him, but he says, no, go away. The counter example to that is the rich young ruler, right? When Jesus actually invites him to come follow me. And in terms of this kind of like inversion or stepping out of oneself, it totally makes sense that the rich young ruler, right? This person at the top of a kind of a hierarchy, that's the person that Jesus asks to follow him. Like, you're on top.
Yeah.
I actually now want you to follow me, not to be the leader anymore.
Become
right?
a disciple.
That's what you need.
Yeah.
That's what you need. Other people don't need this.
Ruler, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what's interesting too is that he's the only one who doesn't do it. Like he's the only person in the Gospels who's told, follow me, and doesn't do it.
Yeah.
Everyone else does it, you know, because they're like, okay.
Like,
nope. Like I can handle that, you know? But like, that's like this guy, like that, there's the obstacle there, right? Again, it's like that compulsive self-reliance thing. If you're rich, you're young and you're ruling, like you've got everything in society that you need to have, that you should have, right? You got money, you got youth, and you got power. Like what other kind of life is there, man? Don't we all want to be like, you know, wealthy, young and powerful? Like that's kind of what we're sold, right? Is like, this is the good life. And he has it. And Jesus says like, get rid of it. And you're like, wait, no.
And he says, no, thank you.
I can have just a little. I can have a little bit of it.
What if I had a smaller entourage? What if I followed you and had a smaller entourage?
Jesus, I totally hear what you're saying. I also don't like it.
Yeah. Do you hear what I'm saying?
Yeah. But I think that like it's these, you know, what like that's what makes this show so beautiful, right? Is that you begin to have a sense of who these people are as persons who really can be indwelt by one another, right? Like they can share in one another's personhood, but I think they only can do so in as much as they're able to share in one another's brokenness. Yeah. Right. Like that to me kind of becomes the pathway to it, because that's where we begin to see what's behind those personas, and we begin to see those personhoods instead. Right. Like again, Troy is free to actually be the guy who was scared to like try to do the thing because he meets Abed. Abed frees him from that.
Yeah.
And I wonder again, like what would it be like for us as a people to like not feel the need. And I think there's a difference between not hiding your brokenness and putting it fully on display, because I do think even that can be kind of abusive and destructive, right? Like Brene Brown calls it floodlighting, which I think is a really good way to put it. It's almost like here's all of my stuff, right? Yeah. And in some ways that also is a way to mask one's vulnerability and brokenness, because it just goes like, here's all of my crap up front, you know, like if it's sort of that misused Marilyn Monroe quote that like, if you can't handle me at my whatever, then you don't deserve me at my whatever.
Yeah.
You know, but I mean, I think there's a truth to that. Like if you can't handle me at my worst, then you don't deserve me at my best. But there's kind of like it's like that kind of signaling of the self in some ways, right? That presenting of, it's another persona of just like how damaged I am.
Yeah.
And if you can stay and put up with that, you know, and I think we all probably have known people who've done that in some ways.
Yes.
And it is really off-putting because you're still not interacting with a person in those moments. It's still a persona that you're engaging. But I've wondered, like, what if we kind of entered into relationships knowing that this is ultimately where we're trying to head, right? That we're ultimately trying to get to this place of creating safety, creating a place where we can actually expose who we are, share our personhood on a really deep and meaningful level.
Yeah. Yeah. In this honest and vulnerable way, right? Because that safety needs to exist in order for people to actually make those disclosures, right?
Yes.
One of the things that keeps us within ourselves is like shame. One of the things that keeps us within ourselves is the sense of not wanting to belong, right? That people won't like me. Yeah. This is like that. It's that kind of Troy movement, right? Like Troy spends high school pretending to be a certain way, but we realize that's not who he is. We realize like who Troy actually is once Abed sees him. And you know what it is? Because I've rewatched it now. It's the first Halloween episode when Abed dresses up like Batman and Troy dresses up like I guess he's like Burt Reynolds or is it Eddie Murphy? He's got like the red sort of leather something. I don't even know. Anyway, they're talking at the very end and they're doing these weird voices and they're talking about like the things that are in their heads. And Troy says to Abed, you know, it's really cool to know that somebody else thinks about this stuff all the time. And it's their first kind of moment of connection in the series, like episode 4 or 5, pretty early on. And then their friendship begins to blossom, right? And like some of it comes from Troy realizing like, yeah, these are the questions that keep me up at night. This is what's happening inside me.
Yeah.
You experience this as well. I can share this with you. You're not going to judge me because I have this.
You've never read this C.S. Lewis's The Four Loves, right?
I don't believe so.
Definitely worth reading. But when he describes friendship, he's like, friendship is this kind of like phenomenological moment where like two people encounter one another and they're able to kind of like look at the same thing, see it similarly and say, I thought I was the only one. Right? Like where dang it. You know, like and it's such an unnecessary part of our lives in some ways, right? Like friendship. Like obviously like the other loves that he talks about are like affection and eros and like all of these kinds of things. Like human beings need erotic love just to like continue as a species, right? We need to have affection as children from our moms and dads because like we thrive on that. We need the love of God to kind of like have our existence at all. But friendship is kind of like this thing that's just kind of, we don't really need it, you know, in like the same sense that we need those other ones. And that's why Lewis thinks it's actually one of the most beautiful of the loves, because of its completely unnecessary nature. You know, like we don't need it for any kind of like survival mechanism, but that it provides kind of this lens through which we can begin to encounter like the beauty of life. And you see that with Troy and Abed for sure, right? Like just like they're each other's ride or die, you know? And it's fantastic to have that moment when you have that like, oh, I thought I was the only one that saw this way. But to find the heart shared in another person. I mean, there's so much to say about the show, and I'm sad that I feel like we're not going to be able to cover even a quarter of the stuff that we had prepared to talk about. But one of the things that I want to touch on is kind of like the theme of the table, because to me that was like one of the most like sacramental kind of components to the show, where like the table that they sit at as a study group is the thing that they go into and flow out from all the time. Like everything comes back to the table and it goes forth from the table and it comes back to it's like this constant kind of like this thing. And like from week to week, right? They're coming,
Yeah.
they're coming to the table and they're leaving the table and they're like going and doing the thing. This would have been a really boring show if it only took place at the table.
Yeah.
I'm afraid that our church communities only take place at the table.
Mm.
And they don't take place out in the world in the way that they need to. They
Mm.
don't take place dealing with things, getting in paintball fights, breaking kind of, one another's hearts in some ways, where we actually begin to experience the real significance of something like Forgiveness Sunday.
Yeah.
Where we don't begin to really experience life with one another in the way that we see the need to forgive one another, to be friends with one another. I think we spend so much time just like going to the table and leaving the table, going to the table, leaving the table. And like, what a boring show.
Yeah.
No wonder like young people are like, because like, what is it? I mean, really, honestly, like, what does it have to say?
Yeah.
Yes, like the table is an essential component of like this community's life. There would be no community without that table.
Yeah.
Which is why when they burn it, they're like, what did we do? Like, oh God, no, right?
Yeah.
And so they rebuild one. They build a new one.
Yeah.
Because they need the table. They realize that. And to me, I was like, dude, this is the sacrament, like the sacramental joining point of their lives is around this table. And when it's lost, it's profound. The impact is felt. So is there some place where like, do we need these like these sacraments, and do we need to be joined to one another at the table? And yes. And if it's the only place we meet, it's going to be a very boring show.
Yes. Yes. Right. Because the table is the place of coming together. Right. Which actually, like, even classically, right, the liturgy was referred to as synaxis, which still in a monastic context is like when the brotherhood comes together for a particular purpose. It's this kind of coming together. But we kind of come together so that we can be sent. Right. Like even in the show, the rhythm of the show, they come together at the table, and you see the consequence of this, or this is sort of lived out when Troy rescues Britta during the recital, right? When she kind of like freezes and can't dance anymore. It's when the gang goes and backs Pierce up when they're playing that video game for his inheritance, right? Like they come together at this table, but they sort of like are still together when they go forth into the world, like navigating all of those challenges and so forth. And the thing is, like, the fact it's this constant sort of flow. It's this going out and coming in. It's this gathering and being sent, right? It's not linear. It doesn't really end. But I think that you make a really, really interesting point. Like if this was just 12 Angry Men, right? That movie, which just takes place in the courtroom, right? And if this show was just seven angry students.
Then there's that one, like the bottle episode. Remember when they're all in the study room and he's like, it's a bottle episode.
Yeah.
And it is kind of like everyone dreads the bottle episode.
Yes. But it makes sense because it's the exception to this larger rhythm, right?
Yes.
It's kind of like this punctuation point.
Yep.
And it's like this focusing and this like the distillation of all of their frustrations and their fears about each other, right? And they kind of work through actually what it is for them to be there. Yeah. It's them putting aside their differences, and it's them putting aside, right? Like you have to be reconciled to your brother before you come to the table. What they realize actually is this complete lack of reconciliation. Like Annie is suspicious of everybody, and like Pierce is sabotaging everybody, and like all of this kind of comes to a head. But it's healed, right? And it's also interesting that in that episode, the table gets sort of like thrown on its side.
The tables get turned,
right? Yeah.
There is that. They upend it. They can't sit at the table together.
Yeah. But at the end,
they do.
There's this healing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder, right? Like if this definitely is the place that we need to, like, again, as Christians, see that like our life goes back to and flows forth from.
Yeah.
But if we don't see it as simply the brackets of life, we're going to miss out on a lot of other things. Like it's simply the place where we start and the place where we end, but it's not the only place.
Yes.
And it can't be the only place, right? Greendale still needs to be saved. People still need to be met. Lives still need to be changed. It's not going to be much of a community if all they do is meet at the table and then go about their lives.
Yes.
Which again, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but maybe I've shared it before, but there was like one moment where just like some like person that who goes to our parish back before COVID, this was what was happening. And I remember like walking out to like go get something out of my car, and like they were leaving the church, and like I don't really have a relationship with this person. And I was like, see you next week. And it just felt so like, who cares? Like, like who cares if I see you next week? You don't care.
We never talk. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't care if I see you next week. And frankly, like, I don't really care if I see you next week.
Yeah.
I mean, not in like I don't mean that to sound as heartless as it sounds, but there's no, we don't ever, like, you're Leonard.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like we have like moments of maybe interaction, or you're like, magnitude. You just hop in and pop. I don't know. Like that's where I think it gets to be a little indicting on us.
Yeah.
Like the show can definitely be indicting.
Yeah. Because community builds, right? Community builds by going out. Or I should say it's both, right? Community builds when new people are brought to the table. You see this especially as like, because that's another through line, actually. Because at the beginning I said, the through line is sort of Jeff Winger, but really like the table becomes a through line of this series for all 6 seasons, right? Because when Frankie comes in and Elroy comes in and all these new people come in, like they get a place at the table. When Chang joins,
and the question is often like, where are they going to sit?
Yes.
Like when they were imagining pitching season 7, they're like, but where will they sit?
Yeah. Yeah. Because everybody has a place that's theirs.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's belonging. That's Shirley's spot. That's Annie's spot. Yep. That's Troy's spot.
Yep. Absolutely.
But
I wonder if that's why too, like why it has to end at the table, like when they have that last moment together as a community, they're embracing like at the table. And even that moment is punctuated by like Chang's confessions.
Yes.
Right. Like there's this like he finally is just like, I'm legit gay.
Yeah.
And it's like funny, right? It's like a funny moment, but like that, I think that's what like true communion at the table brings us to, is this like opening of the self in some way, right? This coming out of hiding.
Yeah.
This putting down the mask and just stripping it all away and saying like, this is what's true about me.
Yeah.
We can't help it.
Yes. Which is a beautiful thing that happens a couple of times actually in the series, right? It happens at the episode where after Pierce dies, they get the bequeathments, right? And everybody realized that Pierce is messing with them from beyond the grave. And Jeff is like, we're going to put all our cards out on the table. And he's like, I prefer to look at myself than the women that I'm with, right? And they kind of go around and they share like these deep personality quirks. And that's kind of where the tension begins to resolve, is like the walls come down and we can be known with all of our flaws, right? And then we're going to kind of like, we're going to do our thing together.
Yep.
That's a beautiful, I think, realization. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this show is just fabulous. It really is. And I feel like we could probably just go on and on and on about it. But like, I think that ultimately kind of for me, like what the overarching theme of this is that like forgiveness and transformation and all of this stuff is possible, right? But it really is only possible, I think, within the context of a loving community. Like there needs to be a witness to it. There needs to be some sense of like, I've had clients who, have dealt with like couples who've dealt with like trust issues, for example, right? Sure. Like where one like there's been like a betrayal of trust of some kind, whether it's like lying or affairs or whatever. And then there's like a disclosure of that thing. And then there's like the person who's been violated is like, well, how will I ever trust you again? I don't know how I'll ever trust you again or anything like that. But then it like the path toward that in some ways becomes like, well, what I need to see happening is a matching between, because even like sometimes like the person who's betrayed will say like, well, I can't just give you words. Like those will just be words. What you need is actions. And so they kind of draw this dichotomy between like word and action. Like words aren't enough, but like actions will be. But the reality is like, unless I give you words and my actions match them, there will be no like capacity for trust, right? Because then I'm just doing random things. Like I may be like loyal to you, but if I tell you I'm going to be loyal to you and then I actually am loyal to you, and I tell you that I'm going to pick up the dry cleaning at 4 and I actually pick up the dry cleaning at 4, and I tell you that I'm going to call you at 6 and I actually call you at 6, then when I tell you I'm going on a business trip to wherever and I'm going to be busy for the night and I won't be able to call you, well, now I have all of these like moments of saying like, look, my words and my actions actually match one another.
Yeah.
And so there becomes this capacity for transformation, but it has to happen in that connection. It has to happen in that communion. I become someone trustworthy by doing trustworthy things with you.
Yeah.
Right. Like that, like that's how that occurs.
Yeah.
And I think the show shows that. The show shows that like we need other people to be witnesses to our movement, to be able to know when we've kind of like regressed into some of those kind of, you know, weird spaces.
Yeah. To hold us accountable when we stumble, right? But to sort of like love us and pick us up. Because there are definitely moments when Jeff stumbles along the way. Like he's tempted to go back to the law firm, right? And the gang goes to the party and Annie chloroforms the lawyer and all that, but they kind of like, they're there for him. And Jeff realizes like, I caught something at the end of this. I care because these people around me sort of care. Right. And he becomes sort of a person that's capable of more trust, because he's a liar and a fraud at the beginning too, you know, but he's inspired by the trust of those around him. No, I think it's a beautiful thought. Like what if our church communities were more like the study group, right? What if our church communities were more like Greendale, a place where we could be our honest, broken selves, not for the sake of wallowing in that brokenness, but for the sake of actually like being the precondition towards healing. You know, no more games, no more sort of posing, right? But we're all like, we reveal our Chang-like megalomaniacal tendencies, right? Poor Napoleon over there, who ends up becoming a friend of theirs, and like this vulnerable friend at the very end. You know, it's it's lovely. It's a real. Can we become real communities, right? Not just communities in name only, but can we become real communities?
Yeah. I mean, Chang is, I think, is like he's such an obvious like example of that utter change, right? Like the complete 180 of like being somebody who's like hola class, right? And like super against the study group. Yeah. And then you begin to realize he wants to be a part of the study group. And then by the end, he's actually is a part of the group. Which is, and they're going to his play and they're like crying and they're like so supportive of him. And then he's a jerk and he goes off and becomes like a famous voice actor for a hot second.
Yeah.
Then he comes back and no one says anything about it.
Yes. Though they could, right? They could.
Totally could have. Would have been entitled to it. To be like, jerk move, dude, you know, whatever. But not how it rolls. Not how it rolls for them.
Yeah. And this is something, you know, you put this in the outline, right? This is something we've talked about in Be the Bee episodes in particular. It's like putting away the thing that we can do, right? The sort of prerogatives that I have, because Lord knows Chang earned some level of disrespect when he almost blew up Greendale, for crying out loud. Like he was like an epic cartoonish villain for a while there in season 3. So if they're going to rag on him for losing this chance at Hollywood, like I think he would have earned it, but they don't, right? Like even though I have this prerogative, I choose not to. I choose to sort of like sacrifice myself for you so that you can actually have this place where you can heal and be integrated in the community. Yeah. I really like that you brought that up. Like he comes back and he's just welcomed back in. He's just welcomed.
Yes. Yep. There's no nothing. And I'm thinking like if I had been into that, like it would have taken me so much of like biting my tongue. And I think they all have that moment, right, where they kind of recognize what's between them. But like it doesn't need to be addressed explicitly, because I think they kind of all know like this is part of just Chang's like brokenness. You know, and like they make room for it. They make room for him. I recently was talking with some of my clients and like use the analogy of like, you know, like you're broken in this way and he's kind of broken in this way. But at the end of the day, like all of us are disabled in some capacity, right? We all have some sort of disability that we're like limping into these relationships with. And we're in wheelchairs. Like we need to be in wheelchairs to get around. But the question is like, how do we make room for one another's wheelchairs? Like if we all had to be in a living in a house and we were all in wheelchairs, some things would need to change, right? We would need to move furniture. We would need to kind of retrofit things to be able to have like space for actually us as persons to navigate our homes, right? And I suggested the same was true with like relationships, that part of it is just being like how do I make room for you in your wheelchair instead of just being mad that you're disabled, like, because I can't, like, it's just a disability.
Yeah. Because we're starting with the plot, right?
Yeah.
If the plot is like getting up the
be.
stairs,
Like, yeah.
I'm mad at you because you can't get up the stairs or whatever it is.
But can we work together to build a ramp?
Yeah.
Or rearrange the couches and find ways to like navigate this, right? Does that mean that like you're responsible for your wheelchair? Absolutely. Like you need to figure out how to navigate it. You know?
Yeah.
Like I'm
going to give you the space in which to navigate
and accept that like there's things that probably are going to be really hard for you to do when you're in that wheelchair. You know?
Yeah.
And you're maybe in it forever. That doesn't mean that you're any less worthy of love or acceptance or having a seat at this table. It just means we need to figure it. And I think this is the truth with all of our parishes too. Like if we could be like, look, we're all in wheelchairs. Yours is this, yours is that, mine is this, whatever. And like, how do we build ramps for each other instead of like, hating each other for not being able to go up the stairs the same way.
Yeah. Doubling down on stairs.
Yeah. Anyway, love the show.
Mm-hmm.
So
we
good.
Totally just scratched the surface of this outline. Like we had all these like things we were going to get into. There's just so much. There's so much.
Yeah. Maybe we should do like a part 2 community. Bending the rules for community, bending the rules for all of it.
Well, as you observed, we were talking about this before we went live. It's kind of like on some level, it's 4 shows, right? It's 6 seasons, it's 1 show, but you can even sort of break it down into the first 3 seasons, the gas leak year 4, season 5, season 6, like different dynamics, different whatever it is. I mean, there's so many different things to get into. Maybe we'll do 4 episodes just because it's 4 shows wrapped up into one.
Part 1, part 2. Exactly.
Probably not, but anyway.
Yeah, I'm in.
Cool. We might do some of these shows offline so as not to burden the people out there, but
exactly. We'll just reference it. We'll be like, we're going to talk about whatever, and then only talk about community. Be like, this is just like in Community. When
you mean the way we do things with Star Wars, for instance, or Monty Python, or
well, everything comes back to Star Wars. It's the starting and ending point of all things.
True.
So it is what it is. Okay. Shall we wrap this thing up?
Yes. Let's wrap this up in between community episodes. Why don't you? We'll see. But so you guys know at the very end of our episodes now, we kind of highlight a philanthropy corner. We want to highlight something really cool that's happening out there in the world, really just spreading the light of Christ into particular dark places that need it. And Christian, you've got a really cool thing that you want to highlight for everybody this week.
Yeah, today I want to talk about Reconciliation Services in Kansas City, Missouri. So Reconciliation Services is a community outreach organization that has served Kansas City for, at least since I think like 1985, I think was when I saw the start date. So that's like 30 plus years, and began with a guy at the time who went by the name David Altschul, I think is how you say it. And he felt so moved by the Lord's command to help the poor and to care for the needy that he simply just started giving food to those in need. At the time, he was working as an insurance salesman, and as he was giving out food, he met his wife, Thelma, and they began their own kind of ministry after he quit his job. They got married. He quit his job as an insurance salesman, and they dedicated themselves fully to building up this ministry, which they called Reconciliation Ministries. Eventually, what ended up happening was Reconciliation Ministries kind of became like an Orthodox church, and David was ordained as Father Paisius, and his wife took the name Matushka Michaela, which I was like, oh, I know a Michaela. Yeah. So But anyway, as Reconciliation Services grew, he actually ended up transitioning it away from kind of like being something just that his parish was responsible for, and starting it as its own nonprofit, which then kind of like still acts as like a extension of all the the Orthodox churches in the area, like kind of their community, like their outreach programs, as well as like the other like compassion organizations and stuff like this that are really dedicated to serving the needy in the area. Currently, it's headed by Father Justin Matthews as the executive director, who was initially the founding executive director of Focus North America. So there's kind of like a long-standing passing of the mantle or whatever within Orthodoxy. So it is pretty unequivocally like an Orthodox thing. So it's not like some Protestant organization or whatever that people have kind of teamed up with. But it is itself as far as I know, pretty one of its kind. I haven't come across many other things quite like Reconciliation Services, and it provides a bunch of different services, including food distribution, as well as opportunities for people to combat social isolation that often comes to those who are experiencing dire circumstances and homelessness. Right, like that's one of the deeper things, and even like Mother Teresa, she says that there's like a deeper kind of poverty that people are experiencing, and loneliness is like that deepest poverty, right? Like, because if you and I lost our houses, Steve, right, if we suddenly found ourselves on the street, we have dozens of people that would be like, you can come stay with me, like absolutely. So when you find someone who's on this living on the streets, then you can imagine what their social circle is like, right? They don't have a safety net to catch them, or any kind of support that actually might be there. So Reconciliation Services does just that, right? It seeks to reconcile people with one another, and ultimately with the world, which is why they also provide things like case management. It helps connect people with housing and employment, connects them with therapy with a licensed clinical social worker, and even helps them get some help with prescription medications and stuff like this. They also have another part of it that they call Thelma's Kitchen, which is just another one of their initiatives, and provides meals to the area, to those in the area. But with COVID, obviously that makes it a little bit more difficult. But they're still providing like boxed lunches and stuff for people, and it seems like such a cool program overall. It's a remarkable organization that just seems like it's doing a lot for the community. And sometimes I've had friends and I who have talked about like, hey, maybe we should move to Kansas City, just so we can be like participate in something like this, because it just seems so amazing. But of course, that's not really in the cards right now. And you also don't have to move there to support them or help them. Although if you are in the Kansas City area, then definitely like look them up and participate in what they're doing. But if you're not, you can head to their website, which is www.rs3101.org. 3101 is related to like the initial address from where they started. So that's kind of what that means. It's not just some random number, again, that's www.rs3101.org. And you can find places to donate to Reconciliation Services at large. And you can even find under one of their little drop-down menus, it'll take you to Thelma's Kitchen, where you can donate like $11, I think is something like that, to fund a meal to give to somebody, to buy one of these boxes, and have them distributed. So it really it's such an incredible ministry, and I definitely advise you all in heading over there and checking it out post haste. So again, that's Reconciliation Services, rs3101.org.
Yeah,
so check it out.
The link is down in the doobly-doo. If you did not have a pen and paper handy, feel free to click on it down there. I think the coolest thing about that, right, is that it started as this community outreach and became a church community.
Totally.
Which is so cool.
Totally. It's the best. And again, it's the that idea of like, as character driven people, not plot driven people, right? Like that was their path, and that's not the path that everybody ends up in, but like it was the path of that community. And thank God that it was. So
I mean,
well, Steve and Christian did a podcast.
Nice.
Yes. Steve and Christian in the morning.
And look for our forthcoming book, Plot-Driven Christianity. Plot-Driven Christian, which will be out sometime between 6 months from now and 6 years from now. We'll see.
Yes. Exactly. Sometime 6 seasons in a movie.
Yeah. This is fun. I look
Well,
forward to continuing the community discussion, probably offline, but maybe we'll do it again on here.
yes,
We'll see.
indeed. Indeed.